Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 214 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1, and if you'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net, it's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, my name's Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com, but that's really going to redirect you to my new website called Continue. And Continue is basically where I'm putting everything, all three of my podcasts and Strength Coach TV, plus some other resources under one umbrella. So check that out. It's at continuefit.com. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll have access to what I call the Success Series. I did interviews with Coach Boyle, Geraldine Cooper-Smith, Don Saladino, Ron McKeefery, and Alan Cosgrove, all about achieving success in the fitness business. So go to continuefit.com to sign up for that. All right, today on the Coach's Corner, I have Coach Boyle talking about a thread called when to incorporate single leg jumping and plyos. Also, ACL injury stats in the NFL preseason, pre-workout drinks and what they sell at MBSC. That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to discuss money, something trainers hate to talk about. The Functional Movement System segment, we have Frank Dolan on, and Frank's been telling me about, he went to the Functional Capacity Screen workshop this summer, and he started incorporating it in his business, and he's been really seeing phenomenal results as he ties this whole thing in together. So I wanted him to come on and really just talk about that. So good stuff coming up from Frank in a little bit. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Dr. Fergus Connolly. He's the performance director for the University of Michigan Football. He's also the author of a new book, everybody's talking about it, Game Changer, The Art of Sports Science. Dr. Connolly will give us an overview of the book. We'll talk about different roles and how the strength coach has evolved, his 4 coactive model, working backwards with planning and prep, what we can learn from the military, his thoughts on data, periodization, recovery, and so much more coming up from Dr. Fergus Connolly in a little bit. Lots of things to get to. Let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Anthony. How are you?
All right, I'm doing okay. All right, we know you got to be a little sad. Michaela went to college yesterday. She's off. She's on her own.
Yeah, it's a pretty it's an interesting time. One part of me is really excited to watch her play at a really high level and play with all these great players, and the other part of me is a little bit sad that she is that far away. So I think it's one of those things I think you realize when you're there that, wow, it's a little bit more of a sacrifice than I thought it would be when, before you actually got there.
Yeah.
So, but I posted yesterday on my Instagram that I'm really glad that time flies, because it'll be a quick month until we get up there to see her play again, and they scrimmage in a month, and then they actually play in Boston. Their first 2 games are 28th and 29th of September against Northeastern, so that'll be nice too.
Oh, very cool. Did they play at the same rink as the men?
They do.
Awesome. Great place.
It is a great rink.
Cool. Let's get into it. Coach, somebody posted this morning on the Beginners Forum. I know how most of us incorporate jumping progressions, more or less. Number 1, box jumps, and hurdle jump and stick. Hurdle jump and bounce, repeated hurdle jumps. The question was, would single leg vertical and linear start after the 4th phase? I think some other people were saying that they could do it sooner than that.
I think if you did it as a test, it would be okay. And the one thing we've done with single leg vertical jump as a test is we started just jumping off one leg and landing on 2, so that we could get the power output idea that we wanted, but minimize the effects of the landing. So I think you could definitely do that. I don't think I wouldn't do it from a training standpoint, but I think you'd be fine doing it from a testing standpoint.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's that much more dangerous than a skater?
I just think it's unusual. I don't think what we've seen is that people are not used to jumping or hopping really as high as they can and then landing on that same segment. They're very used to jumping or hopping over, sort of in a little more controlled environment. But when it's like, okay, that max vertical jump effort, and then I think we've seen some people, I would say, get surprised by the landing.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's similar with a lot of times when I'm teaching single leg deadlift or what we talked about this last week, my single leg straight leg deadlift. What I find is a lot of people, they have these great double leg deadlifts with the kettlebell and their butt's moving way back, a nice shape. They're pushing back and they have a good knee bend. But when they go to do the single leg deadlift, it seems like it's a little too straight, almost like I was like, no, it's a deadlift. It's still a deadlift for them, the way I'm teaching it. But they kind of seem to forget that and that like it's really the same movement that I'm trying to teach them. And I think sometimes the single leg does present a lot of other issues.
I think it does. There's just a lot going on from a motor control standpoint that I think people just aren't used to. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So in a lot of cases, and that's where, as I said, when you're thinking about a power test, all right, we're measuring vertical hop, really, because it's not, we get into sort of trying to have the correct terminology, and I keep finding myself, I say single leg vertical jump, and it's like, that's a redundancy.
Yeah.
So it's single leg vertical hop. But I just think, as I said, it takes people a little bit by surprise when it's, okay, go as high as you can and land. And the landing part, they kind of get almost like a little shock. Like, ooh, God, that, I wasn't ready.
Yeah. Obviously, you're throwing some balance in there, and people get a little freaked. And Coach, obviously, this would probably be these type of jumps are going to be important for ACL prevention. And you had sent me a tweet from Derek Hansen, ACL injuries requiring surgery in the NFL prior to week 1. 2013, there was 31, 2014, 22, 15, 26, 16, 22. 2017, there's 20 and counting already. We haven't started week 1. It's crazy.
It is crazy. I couldn't believe the stat. I actually went back and checked it after I looked at Derek's tweet, and then I went back before I sent it to you this morning to try to figure out where did that come from. And it's actually from a fantasy website because they're trying to keep everybody updated, picking fantasy teams. So I believe that it's accurate, but it's staggering. And I still think it speaks to the fact that people do not still train the way that they should in terms of unilateral training and that ability to do a one-leg squat. And I don't know. I'm just flabbergasted by the whole thing, to be honest.
Mike, but here's one argument maybe against that is that let's say the 80s didn't have the kind of training that we have now. We know how bad some of the training probably was back then. But they might not have had the ACL injuries. What do you attribute that to?
I don't, it would be interesting to look back and see if that was in fact the case. I think there's one, and you'd have to look at the advent of artificial turf, because I think that clearly has had some type of bearing on this in terms of there's much less give and slide on turf than there is on grass. So as much as people might want to say that's not part of it, I'd be curious to see. And I will tell you, it seems to me, at least in BU, there were more ACLs when I first got there than there were later. Now, I don't have any idea statistically if that's true.
Hockey team, you mean?
Going from memory that we seem to have, that there seemed like, I don't know, we have 4 or 5 guys with ACL tears when I first got there, and then eventually we got to the point where we saw very, very little.
That's football, Mike?
In football, yes. And so I think of that and say, for us, that coincided very strongly with the advent of single leg training. But I don't really know. I don't know if they were keeping statistics the way that they kept them before. And I don't know even if diagnostically we were as sophisticated as we are now. I don't know when the advent of the MRI was. There's a lot of stuff that you got to kind of look at and say, I mean, who knows? Were there sort of, because I remember reading years ago in my at my early career as an athletic trainer that it was not unusual when somebody had a knee operation for them to go in and realize that they had a torn ACL.
Wow.
That had not been diagnosed. So that's the other part of the issue. So I guess I can give you a clearly equivocal answer and say I'm not really sure.
Yeah. And I wonder also the size of the guys nowadays seem to be a little bit bigger, obviously, and so obviously it's a lot more force that they need to be able to decelerate. Also, maybe I think playing this idea of all year round training, etc. Whereas they're usually, for a lot of guys, there's no break, right? So it's much more competitive.
Yeah, and I think when you think about it, size has changed, speed has changed, surface has changed, footwear has changed. All of these things have changed during that same time period. And as I said, I don't, I'd have to go back. I mean, I remember the Astrodome started being built, but I don't know when the majority of football teams stopped practicing and playing on grass. And I wonder how much that correlated.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Coach, you were posting, you have a lot of parents asking about C4 and other pre-workout products. So I got a couple of this. First, tell us what C4 is for those of us that don't know. And then just give us an overview of what you're doing at MBSC in terms of selling any kind of product, pre or post-workout product.
So C4 is one of these kind of pre-workout, which I guess that probably the closest thing that I can make it analogous to for me is the old Ultimate Orange stuff. Do you remember that? Was that in your time period?
Well, it might have been in my time period, but I wasn't really familiar with it. It wasn't something that I would have been using.
They're basically pick-me-up kind of stimulant sort of products that kids are using pre-workout. And for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure why, they're clearly gaining popularity. So I'm actually just looking at the label right now, and there's niacin in it. If you know anything about niacin, there's what they call the niacin flush, which actually bodybuilders used to use niacin to appear more tanned for contests because it will absolutely give you like a red flush kind of feeling. It gets more blood flow to the surface. There's a carnosine, creatine, arginine, and then they have something in there called explosive energy blend, which anhydrous caffeine. There's your and then they've got these other sort of herbal, velvet bean seed extract, theacrine. I don't even know as T-crine. I don't know, and that's a trademarked thing. So it's a stimulant, really. I don't know exactly. I've never tried it. I just was surprised because I've gotten, I think, probably 4 or 5 texts from friends that I know whose kids go to the gym saying, hey, my kid wants to use this C4 stuff prior to workouts. What do you think? And I'm not I'm very against, I feel like a kid in his teens should not need any type of stimulant prior to going to workout. You know what I mean? If you need some sort of caffeine, niacin, something that's going to give you, kids talk about, I remember we had some baseball guys that used to use it, and they'd always talk about, I love the tingly feeling. Thinking I don't think I want people getting that tingly feeling. Because the other thing, and I always worry, I'm very concerned about kind of the slippery slope, and I think we've talked about that a bunch of times in the podcast, but once guys start doing things like this, whether it's, now you've got a guy who's taken C4 and decides he's going to wash it down with Red Bull and then a Monster Energy drink. And I think you're going to see kids having cardiac issues from all of the stimulant.
Yeah, we just talked last week about all these legal issues coming up, and I think like you make a good point. I mean, you're a preteen, you're a teen. I'm sorry. There's really should be no reason why you need this stuff, and it's really amazing to me. And obviously, it's all financially driven from where that message is coming from. But yeah, it seems because also the problem I always have with those type of things is how the hell do you know what else they're doing? You don't know how much water they're drinking before they come, if they're hydrated, or what are some of the things that they're doing nutrition wise, and what are some of the things that could be contraindicated, like with the rest of their health history. So it's always kind of crazy to me for an extra couple dollars that you think you're going to make to start adding these things.
Yeah, I'm very pro supplement if I think it's something that's going to help you to get stronger. I'm not pro stimulant. And as I said, if I'm reading, I'm reading from their website. Explosive energy, heightened focus, and an overwhelming urge to tackle any challenge. That's the C4 experience. And it's like, does a 14-year-old kid need that prior to working out? I don't think so. And I think, as I said, what's that kid going to need when he's in college or if he gets to the professional level in order to be able to get through a game or get through a workout if he's been taking C4 at 14 years old to get himself, jazzed up for his workout? He's got to get excited. I feel like it's a glass of false enthusiasm.
No, you're right. I don't want to be ridiculous, but it is kind of a gateway drug because another kid will start saying, "Hey, what are you taking that C4 crap? You got to take this. This is the stuff that's really good." So.
Yeah, and as I said, someone else saying, how about if you mix C4 with Red Bull instead of mixing it with water? So suddenly, and I know for me it's really funny, but I went one time to Starbucks and I didn't know, I assumed, and we always talk about the word assume, that blonde was a lighter coffee. And then so I get, the blonde. That's probably a little less strong than the normal coffee at Starbucks. I don't love Starbucks coffee. It's always too strong for me. And I was literally having irregular heartbeats and jitters, and I'm like, what the heck? Why did that cup of coffee affect me so much? So I look it up on the Starbucks website, and blonde is their highest caffeine coffee. So I just noticed, even in myself, I'm really caffeine sensitive to the point of too much of a really caffeinated coffee. I can sense an irregular heartbeat in myself. And I saw this with some of our pro baseball guys, where guys would literally think they were having heart problems. And it was strictly too much stimulant, too much caffeine, particularly in baseball. They always talk about the greenies. When they took amphetamines out of baseball, that was when a lot of this stuff, C4 and things like this, started to get popular because there were a lot of guys who were very used to playing after taking amphetamines. And so suddenly they were thinking, okay, how do I, whether it's, 5-hour energy or 3 cups of coffee or C4 or whatever it is. But as you said, what I worry about is the combination of 5-hour energy and C4 and 3 cups of coffee and a high school kid who might be tired, might be dehydrated, and maybe has an undiagnosed heart ailment.
Yeah.
So, all of these things are not that sort of far crazy off the board to think about.
It's true. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not a Starbucks fan either, but I like to just go in there and ask for a tall blonde usually. So.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Coach. On that note, we'll let you go. So have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
All right, hey, everybody. Just a reminder, Perform Better is having their annual summer sale. Lowest prices of the year. It's going on until September 30th. All the top sellers are on sale, not just the little guys, but you got super bands, cook bands, test kits, Dynamax balls, rollers, mats, kettlebells, ropes, sandbags, TRX, you name it. Everything's on sale. And also up in Rhode Island, up in the Functional Training Institute, you got functional dry needling coming up on September 29th and 30th, and then the barefoot training specials level 1 on October 21st and 22nd. Check all of their continuing education out at performbetter.com.
Hi, I'm Frank Dolan for the Functional Movement System segment. Over the last year, there have been quite a few additions to the FMS arsenal of tools. There's been the new website, the modified screen, as well as the fundamental capacity screen. I attended the workshop back in March, and we've implemented in our business and seen a tremendous improvement, not just in getting people results, but also our systems of program design. So speaking to Anthony, he asked if I would come on and talk about some of those implementations over a couple of episodes. So as someone who, I've been doing FMS since like the late 2004. So, I've had quite a bit of experience with doing the FMS and teaching it. And this was really a kind of a shift for me, and something that was always a little bit of a frustration. We were always coming up against people making a pretty easy and logical connection between the FMS testing and exercise, but then it sometimes was a little bit, murky or a little bit cloudy when people were trying to make that transition to how ankle mobility or an active straight leg raise or even the deep squat, how is that going to relate to football, to basketball, to baseball? I think the FCS is really what's going to be able to help bridge that gap for you to get people to understand, whether it be parents or the athlete themselves or coaches, to see really how deficiencies in FMS show up later on in the FCS, and then where that's actually hurting them on the field. So this is, for us, it's really about identifying weak links and then programming them out from there. So people have, who've gone through the FMS education, you've seen the pyramid that Lee and Gray and all the instructors put up about, having skill at the top of that pyramid, and then through the middle, that performance piece, and then movement on the bottom. I've always kind of described what we do in our gym on Long Island, the performance piece in the middle, but we really want to see that bottom foundation of movement. And going through the FCS, you really almost start seeing that middle piece of performance is these smaller elemental capacities that people and athletes will be lacking before they get to training. And to be quite honest, I think looking back over, the years that I've been doing this since the early 2000s, we probably were putting people in situations where they were not getting as much out of their program or not getting anything at all out of a plyometric or strength training program because they didn't have some of these capacities. They maybe had a pretty decent movement screen score, no ones, no zeros, and we put them through our progressions, but really didn't have some of these smaller pieces and capacities that we're finding now as we're testing our athletes over the last few months are really missing. So just to kind of go over the testing really quick in this episode, and we'll just kind of introduce some of them. The FCS is going to start with, number one, your thorough questionnaire, your injury history, the energy levels that are being affected by an athlete's sleep or nutrition. And then we go into a full FMS. So you're going to look at the 3-foot stances, your symmetrical stance, your single leg stance, as well as your split stance in the first 3 tests, then your mobility bias tests and your stability bias tests. Based on that, we move forward when we have no ones and no zeros and no one asymmetries. Then we can go into our movement control testing, posture control testing, our explosive control testing, as well as impact control testing. So I'll talk through some of those really quickly. In movement control, we're going to take a look at the ankle, which is something that we've kind of always done, although it shows up in the deep squat as well as the inline lunge in the FMS. Sometimes it was always good to just get a quick look at someone's ankle. Now it's embedded in the FCS, so you're going to make sure if you're doing this systematic over a team or an organization, you're making sure that everybody's getting their ankles checked. And then we're going to look at lower and upper body motor control. There's a few tests there that you want to kind of consider this. Some of you are familiar with the Y balance test. This is kind of the Y balance test light. And some of the research is showing that just doing one test per limb can actually give us a pretty accurate depiction of someone's motor control in that side of the body, in that quadrant of the body. We're finding that a lot of the high school athletes over the course of the last few months are, number one, lacking the ankle mobility to even consider that they're going to do well on especially the lower body motor control test. And the way Gray explains it in the screen is not having range of motion through that ankle is going to significantly decrease their ability to feel their connection with the ground, which is going to impact their motor control. So that's been a big one that we're seeing a trend across all the high school athletes that we train. And then the second testing in the movements in the capacity screen is postural control. And we're seeing a tremendous deficiency in our high school athletes with this. This is 75% of body weight split into two hands. There's a standard that's been created through some of the research of being able to walk with that weight with perfect posture for 250 feet and for over 90 seconds. We're having some of our biggest and strongest, high school football players, big linemen that you would think would crush this test, are doing 18 seconds, 20 seconds, 35 seconds. So they have these are kids who are training in a weight room all off season, all winter, squatting, deadlifting, even maybe doing some elements of carries, but maybe not doing it correctly. And this is how they're testing with 75% of their body weight. So if we're looking at athletics and how, our field of sports performance is going to relate to improving someone's ability to perform their sport, we really want to make sure that they have the ability to buffer 75% of their body weight for time, versus having their prime movers be strong in a squat or a deadlift or a bench press. One of the things I like about this is some of those kids that test well, they may be good lifters. They may not do well on this because they're not used to this form of testing. So you can really get a good idea of their expression of work capacity and really what's fatiguing first. You can get under fatigue and have them burn out, and they could still use their prime movers and probably put themselves in a position to get themselves injured. So having them raising that awareness to this, and then also one of the things that we're correlating with this test is, and a lot of our athletes come in, they want more endurance. They want to improve their speed. It's really tough you're always going to be fatigued if you're weak. You're gonna bail out real quick and burn out faster when you don't have the strength levels to not only sustain through a match or a game, but also to sustain through a season. And I think this speaks to a lot of the things that we counter in this industry, and this is just a systematic way to look at the movement capacities. We're looking at kids that come in and maybe they ate a Pop-Tart and had some coffee before they come to a session. Now, they want to run sprints and do endurance. We're actually going to hurt them in that situation. We're not going to make them better on that day. So, really, what is the weak link there? Is it the fact that, they're not strong or they don't have endurance, or is it the fact that they're not fueling correctly? So I think this test is really in alignment with all that stuff that we already know, but sometimes it's good to have, in this case, an appraisal system to be able to measure these capacities. That what we're finding is a ton of the athletes that we have coming through here that we maybe wouldn't catch, we're seeing these problems. And then, I'll finish up real quick with some, just talking quickly about explosive control. We'll look at the broad jump. We're finding a lot of athletes, they'll jump, the broad jump will be pretty decent. They can get out further than their body height, which is the standard. But then when they put their hands on their hips and do the same jump, they're almost the same length. So that tells us that maybe a plyometric program or a strength program isn't really going to help them become more explosive. What's going to help them become more explosive is improving their coordination, having their, coordinating their arms and legs through their core, and that kinetic linking that helps them put more force into the ground. Where in the past we maybe would have that athlete in a traditional, box jump type program and improving their strength. In that test, we then look at some single leg versions of each. And then move on to impact control, which is a triple broad jump, as well as a 2-1-2 jump, which takes a look at single leg ability to store and release energy. So this is, as I mentioned, this has really changed our program design, being able to measure these things and have a much better idea of what the priority is for the athlete that comes in. So not only from a movement quality standpoint, but now, what is the capacity that they need to work on we say get off the sheet, right? So if our scorecard has the FMS as well as these other capacities, let's get these kids off the sheet first before we start getting them into our traditional programming. So this is going to determine what we give them at home for correctives. It's going to be determining what we do in classes, if they're coming for classes or if they're coming for semi-private sessions. And it really shows us if they're ready for our programming. Next time we're going to talk a little bit more about maybe some case studies. We worked with a team of about 80 players, the local football team. We'll look at some of those scores and some of the impact that having this testing, and then some of the training that we did with them, which was very much in alignment with the FCS correctives. And then we'll talk through some of the systems of how we implemented, not only just the hard systems of how to implement the FMS and FCS, but also the soft systems, how to talk to parents, how to talk to players when they come in, and really get them to follow the program on their own. So we can talk through that quite a bit. This has been Frank Dolan for the Functional Movement Systems segment. I'll talk to you next time.
Hello, it's Rachel Cosgrove, the owner of Results Fitness and Results Fitness University with the Business of Fitness segment. And today I want to talk numbers. I know it's not a favorite topic, but let's talk about, some numbers, because I think this is one of those, again, topics that, I talked about marketing last week. This segment, I want to talk about another topic that people don't like to talk about. So when we talk about numbers, one of the first rules that I teach, if you've ever been to one of our events, one of our business events, our mentorship, one of the things that you've learned from us, is the rule of pay yourself first. And it's something I make people repeat. It's something I make them say. And a lot of people, come to our events, they spend 2 days with us. They know this rule. They say, pay yourself first. And then they leave the event and they still neglect to pay themselves first. So I just wanted to touch on this, because if you're not writing yourself a paycheck, which is so easy to do. I know, I get it. When we first opened our gym, we did the same thing. We'd run our business. Money would come in, money would go out, and it was like whatever was left over at the end of the month. Maybe we would get a paycheck, maybe we wouldn't. And basically we'd try to make ends meet. Maybe we'd end up using a credit card. But we didn't have that paycheck in place. Once we decided that we were going to pay ourselves, that absolutely this business needed to pay us X amount of money. Start with something, to help you pay to support your life. You need something. You're worth that. But you basically demand that your business is going to support you, and you demand that it needs to pay you that amount of money. And so once you put that in as a priority and you start to pay yourself first and pay yourself a paycheck, that's a game changer, because now you're not going to resent your business. Now you're going to, feel like, you're getting paid what you're worth. And guess what? Your business will start to produce that. And so if we start with that, and it's just something I want you guys to think about as you are thinking about your numbers, as you're either opening your business, starting your business, or maybe you're in the middle of your business. If you don't look at your profit and loss, if you don't know what money is going in and what money's coming out, after this, you listen to this podcast, I want you to go take a look at your numbers. I want you to learn what's going in and what's going out. And overall, I just want to give you some ideas, some numbers to start to shoot for. For that number of paying yourself first, I feel that an owner should be getting a salary of anywhere from 10 to 20% of the gross income that's coming in. So if you have, if you have $10,000 coming in, you should be getting a paycheck of $1,000 to $2,000. So whatever that gross income is, okay, basically take 10 to 20% of that for your own salary, okay? Then we have to have a profit. The definition of being a business is that a business is an entity that does produce a profit. If you're not producing a profit, then you are called a nonprofit or a charity. So you do have to produce a profit, and we're shooting for a 15 to 20% profit. So of that, let's say $10,000 to keep it simple, 15 to 20% of that needs to be left over as a profit on top of the 10 to 20% that you're getting as a salary. So if you're going to have, if we're going to have a 15% profit, we got about $1,500 that we're going to be left over, plus our $2,000 that we're going to pay ourselves. So what we have left of the $10,000 basically is you're going to have your $10,000 and you're going to subtract $3,500, $2,000 for you and $1,500 for profit. You end up with $6,500 left. This is what you have to pay your expenses. And so whatever your rent is, we suggest keeping it between the $1 to $3 per square foot per month, or $12 to $36 per square foot per year. That will keep you in a good range. That has to fit within that money, right? That's the money you have to spend. In addition, the other piece of that is your payroll. So payroll is always one of the biggest expenses, payroll and rent. Payroll is one of the things you have control over. So whatever's left over, and it's going to be the 60 to 75% you have left over after you've paid yourself 10 to 20% and you have a profit of 15 to 20%, that leftover 60 to 75%, you as the owner, your job is to be as resourceful as possible with that gross money that's coming in. And as you're increasing it, as it's getting, you're making more and more money, how can you use that money as resourcefully as possible to get the best results for your clients, to have the best customer service, to give the most value, and to really, use your team and use your resources as best as possible. So hopefully that kind of simplifies it and makes it, easier to think about. I come back around to that first lesson of pay yourself first, set that as a priority, and then, make sure you are really planning out your business to make a profit. We don't want to plan out your business to break even. And then in the end, whatever's left over is what we have to be as resourceful as possible with. You're going to have to, look at your payroll and decide. You may have to make some tough decisions, but those are the things that as owners, you have to protect your business because it's what's going to set you up for your future. So hopefully that, gives you some ideas and doesn't scare you too much talking numbers. But as you guys finish up this listening to this podcast, I highly suggest you go delve into your numbers and just take a look at where your percentages are at and start to think about setting yourself that, salary to pay yourself first. So hopefully that's exciting to you if you're all getting a raise. So congratulations. And we'll talk to you guys again soon. If you want to check out more, go to resultsfitnessuniversity.com. You can also find us on social media on Instagram and Facebook as Results Fitness University.
All right, now time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, and I am here with Dr. Fergus Connolly, and he's the performance director for the University of Michigan football. Prior to joining he was with the San Francisco 49ers as the director of elite performance. He's also worked as a performance consultant for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Cleveland Browns, New York Knicks, and multiple English Premier League teams, Australian rules football teams, professional rugby teams. He's also served as a sports science director with the Welsh Rugby Union and was the strength and conditioning coach for the Bolton Wanderers Football Club. He just came out with a book that is a beast, The Game Changer. It's the art of sports science. Fergus, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Like I said before, I got the book, and you could do a workout with this book. It's so heavy, and it's a beast. I mean, I looked at it, I was like, "Holy cow! This thing took 20 years to write." But so far, I'll tell everybody I haven't read it. I just got it Saturday. Today's Tuesday. And I've been perusing it and just trying to take some notes. And you have a lot of good sections in there where it's easy to kind of figure out what you're trying to get at. But why don't you start out by just giving us an overview of Game Changer? And this is a different book right now. This is almost like a textbook. And right now we're seeing so many just kind of regular a book that just kind of really focuses on one topic. This thing covers so many things. Give us an idea of what you wanted to do when you set out to write this book. What was your goal? And then give us an overview of the book.
Yeah, great. It's a great question to start with, and it's probably the most important one for everybody who's listening, because I was in your shoes at one stage, starting out working with sports teams and in team sports. That's where my passion was. But it was very hard to find a book or to find an article or to find something that was, focused on specifically team sports. There were plenty of books on Olympic sports, on sprinting, on strength training, on flexibility. So there were all of these experts in the different areas, but there was nothing there, no source for me for team sports. How do I pull everything together? And to answer your question in one line, I wrote the book that I would have wanted to read, or that I want to read, as if I'm working in team sport. And it's important, I think, to have that perspective, because as a strength coach, or as a rehab expert or physiotherapist, chiropractor, we all have to work together as a team ourselves to help team sport athletes. So how do I pull everything together, and where does my role fit in it? So the aim of the book is just to explain to coaches, strength coaches, how we win in team sports.
Yeah, and you don't feel like there's certain principles across all of sports that seem to really be the point of the book. Like, here's the principles of all sports.
Yeah. So, when I was starting out, I wanted to understand strength training. So obviously Coach Boyle, there are lots of other coaches out there that I've read their books. I tried to learn from. Flexibility. There's Aaron Mattis down in Florida. There was lots of other stretching experts and stretching ideas. So I've over 15 years pretty much just traveled the world to learn from who I thought and could find the best strength coaches, best flexibility experts, best nutritionists, best team sport coaches, and then obviously started to work in the area. So I took and I used and developed my own principles, my own methodologies. And as I started to work and visit different sports, I realized that the principles are the same, and even the principles of the game. So if you go and watch pick a basketball game, or you go watch a soccer game, even American football, college football, the aim of scoring is to create space. If you can create space and find a teammate in space, that gives him time, and he can place a very good shot or a very good pass. But it's the same in every sport. So the principles, even tactically, are very, very similar, and it's the same principles across all of the different sports. And that's what the book draws out. So the book helps coaches who are working in multiple sports or moving between sports to realize, the principles I learned in rugby apply to soccer, apply to American football, apply to basketball. And it simplifies, some of these things that perhaps some coaches make more complex than they need be.
Well, yeah. I mean, at the same time, there's a lot going on. I think it's hard to decipher some of this information. And let's kind of go backwards a little bit, this kind of idea of the different roles. And I know you feel like maybe strength and conditioning coach is a little bit like becoming an outdated term, maybe. But you've done it all. You're a strength and conditioning coach. You're a sports science director, performance consultant, director of elite performance. Now you're a performance director. There's so many different things going on there, and that's the evolution of what's been happening. Can you just talk to us about the different roles and where you think we need to go with this, and how this needs to play out?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest threats to progress, or one of the biggest challenges, not just in the U.S. but across in developed countries, are we specialize too much, and we sometimes assume a title, assume a role, and just stay in that role only, and it hampers our ability to develop, to adapt, and to work with others. So the term strength coach it's not in itself is not a bad thing, but the assumption is that they just stay in the gym, they just count reps, count sets, and just work in the gym environment only. Where years ago it was more an athletic role. It was it encompassed a lot more, and I think sometimes strength coaches feel as though they're expected just to do that role, where they can contribute in many, many ways. They can work very closely with the position coaches. They can work very closely with chiropractors, with the medical team. So I think the best strength coaches that I know, or whatever term you want to use, are those who bridge out into the other domains, coordinate with the other domains, and expand their ability and demonstrate their ability to be more integrative with all of the other departments or the other people that they work with. So the best strength coaches are those who are very good at what they do, but also create a synergy with the other departments. And I think that's the one piece of advice I would give to any strength coaches to, don't specialize too much, because your value will be increased more so by how you can work with others and how you can demonstrate how your skills can cross the different domains.
Absolutely. And I know I read somewhere in the book where you're talking about we've kind of focused a little too much on the physical part of it. So can you just go over your 4 coactive model?
Yeah, so the danger, I think that one of the dangers or one of the things that has happened is that we can measure everything. And strength coaches, to be really honest, strength coaches have been to the fore of, there's some very, very bright strength coaches. So we have developed different methods of measuring, counting, assessing what we do physically. But we neglect, as a coach now, as an overall coaching group, very often we've neglected how to measure the psychological components, the technical components, and the tactical components. So when you're asked to measure an athlete, or you're asked to assess it, you look at the draft or look at the combine, we assess physical qualities because we can measure them. But we really need to measure all 4 coactives: the tactical, technical, psychological, and physical. And, I use the example of Tom Brady, a Michigan grad. He as somebody whose physical qualities are very good, but they're not the key determining factor in making him a great athlete. His mental strength, his determination are incredibly important, as is his tactical ability, his ability to know space, know the game, and his technical ability, his skill. So if you were just to purely measure Tom Brady, and we've all seen the 40-yard dash, and we've all laughed at it and whatever, but that's a perfect example of the fact that his physical qualities reach the functional minimum. He has the physical qualities to make him a very good player. What makes him a great player are the other 3. So it's just being cognizant, being aware of those is critical for people in our industry.
Yeah, and I think people go the other way. And that reminded me of Wayne Gretzky. I'm a big hockey guy, so it reminded me of Gretzky because Gretzky was the same thing. I mean, if you saw him, and I know times were different in the 80s and 90s, but if you saw him, he was nothing compared to them physically. And then also, he was never like, oh, he's the greatest skater or he has the best shot. He just was brilliant out there, and so I think that's what really reminded me of when you were talking about that.
Yeah, no, Gretzky is a great example, and there are, in many of the sports around the world, the physical qualities are, and one of the challenges that we have is that, when we look at, one of the greatest groups that ever took to the ice was that great Russian team under Tarasov. But when we watched those players play, we saw the physical output. So we saw speed, we saw movement, but we took for granted perhaps their skill level. We sometimes are just drawn to the physical. We see fast movement and we think it's speed, when really it's speed of mind. It's tactical awareness, it's skill that allows the player move fast into space. So it's important to really see what we look at.
No, let's kind of move into data collection with this, because I think when you were talking about with the physical too, a lot of times we look at that because we can measure it, and we've seen this, really maybe we're collecting too much. You've said collecting data is easy, gaining knowledge from data is more difficult. Can you expand on your thoughts on the whole data collection ideas right now?
Yeah, there's again, one of the challenges we have is everybody loves data. Everybody loves, numbers because it gives us a metric and we can compare things. But the insight that is needed is very important, because we, again, you can use the Moneyball example where, you can collect a lot of data, but unless you sit down and speak with the players and understand what motivates them, you don't really know how to get the best from players. And this is a people business. And the best coaches are those are not those who follow, a sports science data-driven model. They use it, they have it. And, again, I work with the great coach here, Jim Harbaugh, and he's, we have data and we use it, and he'll look at it and he'll question it. But he also then has a wonderful ability to manage, the intangibles, as we might refer to them. So it's using both carefully, and not relying completely on numbers alone to make decisions. Because I've said it before, if this was just all about numbers, well, we just sit at home and play PlayStation or Xbox. There are many things that we still cannot measure, and if we can't measure them, well, then we're not taking them into account. So it's being careful with the data that we collect. And for me, I believe that every time we attempt to measure an athlete, we must have a quantitative and a qualitative score. In other words, let's take, for example, a 100-yard dash or a vertical jump. I always use a grading scale, an ABC grading scale, alongside the number, because even if the number is an exceptional number, so for example, you get, you get a 40 reps on whatever bench test, I will always grade it as an A, B, or C, because sometimes you might get that number, but you've struggled, you've done it poorly with bad form. So the number itself just doesn't tell the whole story. There has to be a qualitative assessment along with it. You can run an excellent 100-yard dash or, win the race, but you won it poorly with poor form, and you have to account for that. It's not just about the number.
So you're telling strength coaches then, when they're looking at some of this data, they should also, this ABC qualitative measurement should be there as well, so you can start to figure out maybe there's still some weaknesses, or we're still kind of looking at what's going on to help us improve.
Correct. Because again, you can have somebody who runs a very, very good race, or gets a very good vertical jump, or gets an excellent number of or gets a poor scores in these, but has very good form, is doing it safely, and is going to continue to improve. You need to account for that. You need to acknowledge that. So it's we all have guys who can squat very, very heavy with poor form, and it is going to lead to an injury down the line. So it's having the quantitative and qualitative assessment of the athlete gives you a more fuller picture. And you can color code it, you can ABC it, you can do whatever, but just to continue to be aware of not just what is done, but how well it is being done.
Absolutely. I want to go, you did some takeaways in your book, so I want to jump to one of the first takeaway that you were talking about. And you kind of were talking about the book works backwards, and so you talk about the game first, and that's the first section, right? You go the game, the player, the preparation, the coach. But one of the things was, you said the only true test of a player and team performance, the game itself is the only true test of player and team performance. It's also a measuring stick for the game plan. So center everything on the game, then work backward when in the planning and preparation. So can you just expand on what are some things, because this kind of reminded me of it when you're just talking about looking at this qualitative analysis as well. What are some things when they're watching the game, or they're looking at some of these things that the strength coach should take away from the game and when they're looking at it?
So if you're sitting, let's say you're sitting in a crowd alongside the strength coach, the psychologist, the position coach, and maybe the skills coach, and one of your players makes a great catch, avoids 2 or 3 players, and that makes it 20 yards for a touchdown. The psychologist is going to say, wow, he had that's incredible vision and mental strength to be able to catch that under such pressure, and great awareness to be able to sidestep. The position coach is going to say, what a wonderful catch, what a wonderful balance, what a wonderful movement. The head coach is going to say, well, I wrote a brilliant play for him to be able to find space. And the strength coach is going to go, man, he can run fast. And so we all see what we want to see from our own perspective. But the most important thing from the strength coach's perspective, from all of those coaches' perspective, is to be able to look at the player and identify what the limiting weakness is, and to invest the time to ensure that it's not a limiting factor. It's not something that's holding him back. If it's your fastest player, you keep maintaining his speed, but you try to remove the obstacle. So whatever part of his play. Now, if the ball was thrown and the player fumbled it, didn't catch it, and it was returned for an interception, the perspective from all the coaches would be completely different. The strength coach would say, well, that was a terrible play drawn up by the head coach. The head coach would go, well, the strength coach hasn't gone fast enough. The position coach would go, well, the strength coach, didn't do a good job because he looks tired. So when something goes well, we all take the credit. When something goes bad, we all tend to point the finger. Very often it is at the strength coach or the physical training. But my point is, we need to identify what truly is the limiting factor and fix it. In the majority of cases, we tend to look at physical qualities when very often it's somebody's ability maybe to concentrate, it's somebody's ability to execute under pressure. But in many cases, the strength coaches, particularly in the US, do a darn good job. So, it's work backwards from the game, study the game. One of the other mistakes that happens in many sports, and I won't say it's not exclusive to the US, but the strength coach very rarely sits down with or without the position coach and watches the game film in detail, because they're always very busy getting ready for the next lift or doing recovery. But by sitting and watching the game, study the game, that is when you see truly what area of weakness that needs to be improved on. And it's only in the game that it manifests itself. It's only at that moment of extreme stress. And I had a special forces operator here yesterday when we were talking about very much the same thing, about it's only when they come under true stress in combat on an operation that the weaknesses or the limiting factor becomes apparent. So with our players, study the game. You must study the game to identify truly what area needs to be improved. And sometimes what you believe to have been strength is actually a flexibility issue that, again, would only be seen at that true moment in the game.
Yeah, and this is, there's a lot there, because it's like, from that perspective, going back to the joke, the strength coach, the coach, and the psychologist walk into a bar. But they you're looking at this thing, and for a strength coach to say, man, could this have been a psychological factor? Or now you have to also make sure you study the ins and outs of the game and know that, like you said, that game plan, because you have to look at the other things as well, but then it might be not out of the scope, but something that you might not really have the ability to change.
Yeah, and but what has tended to happen, and we see this in manufacturing, we see this in many different areas, the silo mentality where I am an expert in strength training and nobody else can contribute to my area, or I'm the position coach and the strength coach doesn't know anything about how a receiver or running back play or whatever it is. That's fine, but that's not the way that the best teams or best groups work. And if you're a strength coach at a high school or at a college, or we all have to work across with other people. So the better that we can communicate, learn from, and work with these other people, the better that the end result will be. And it's where that synergy of 2 + 2 = 5. That's what we're trying to get to. So it's difficult, but again, this idea of specialization does not mean better in every case.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Let's kind of stay on this a little bit. In takeaway 2, you were talking about an athlete is a person first and a player second. The coaching staff has a duty to help each member of the squad maintain optimal health, which not only underpins players' continued development and sustainable team excellence, but also allows them to live long, productive lives. What can the regular strength coach out there, the guy that even at a college level who doesn't have a full team that they're able to work, like even on some of the sports, like let's just take some of the other sports, like maybe in some colleges a rowing or a golf team that the strength coach is working with 2 or 3 other teams, and maybe some of the support staff doesn't give the time for those other sports, or somebody who's in high school. What do you feel that they can do to make sure that they're helping their players who are people first to live long, productive lives?
Well, there are 2 things. One is that, there's a perception that if you're a high school coach or a small college coach, that you're at a disadvantage in terms of your profession compared to somebody at a bigger school, and that is absolutely not true. The truth is that at the highest level in professional sports, there's an incredible pressure to use technologies, to spend a lot of money, to use more complicated means to improve the athlete. And in many cases, they don't work. And there is a myth that, that, for example, cryotherapy or many of these other things are going to have a huge benefit. And in many cases, they don't. In many cases, the higher up you go, the more specialized again you become. Whereas at the lower levels, you've got a wonderful opportunity to impact the player far better. You have to be far more innovative. You have to use fewer resources. And that is what makes you a better strength coach. Having more technology at your disposal, having fewer responsibilities, being more specialized does not make you a better or more adaptable strength coach. So those coaches who sometimes feel that they're at a disadvantage, you actually have a greater advantage in terms of your development. And many coaches that I've seen for one reason or another have to step back and work at a lower level actually become far, far better coaches because they've had multiple they've had challenges that they've had to overcome. So that's the first thing. The second point is that having worked across many professional sports, we don't sometimes appreciate the pressure that young kids are under or young athletes are under, and many of them have a lot of challenges to overcome and to manage. And when something goes wrong on the field, or performances start to suffer on the field, in 9 out of 10 times the issue that's causing that problem is not a sports-related issue. It's a lifestyle issue. It's a relationship issue. It's a financial issue. It's some issue that's happening off the field. It rarely is the sport, because we all love that sport. We're very good at it. We enjoy it. People, even Michael Jordan used to say it was his sanctuary on the court. So it's very rarely the sport itself that causes the issue. Mm-hmm. It's something that's happening off the court. So the question and the challenge that for us as coaches and strength coaches is, look after the person to allow that athlete, present itself.
Absolutely. I think Brett Bartholomew did a great job in Conscious Coaching, kind of identifying the different archetypes. So having us help us understand a little bit more about people and kind of some of the things that they're bringing into the locker room and on the field.
Yes. Yeah. No. Brett's book is somewhat of a watershed in the sense of acknowledging the person behind the athlete, and it's an incredibly important part of our role. First of all, as our duty to the industry. And secondly, just as a basic human duty, to look after those people that we work with, because we're all trying to teach essentially life lessons. This is still, at the end of the day, this is sport. It's not life, So, it's important, and it's a way for us to teach young men and women how to live and strive in life. But it's never going to be as important as, some of the other challenges they are going to overcome.
Absolutely. You were talking about the military. In the book, you do mention, some of the lessons we can learn from the military. Unfortunately, some people have taken too many times we take the physical stuff from the military. Unfortunately, recently we had an accident in Long Island, New York, where some kids were a football team was carrying a log over their head, and they dropped it, and one of the kids ended up dying. And I think we take too many of the physical lessons from the military. What are some of the lessons that you want people to learn or take away from the military?
I think, look, there's an incredibly important similarity between the two groups, but everything is specific, and even when it comes to mental toughness or whatever, which is one of the areas that people tend to reach to, psychological and mental toughness is specific to the event. It's always specific. The skills, the execution end up being specific. The principles are the same, but the events are incredibly unique to that event. I think the ability to focus on or to identify the key determinants, I think, are one of the things that you can learn from the military. The use of space, and I've used them in my book, and many of the concepts used in team sport and winning, such as relative superiority, which Bill McCraven wrote about years and years ago in his thesis in Monterey. I have used, because in even small groups, even if you're playing a bigger or better opponent, you still have moments in the game where you have the opportunity to score. So how do you exploit that? How do you soak up pressure in a game? How do you manage your opponent but still execute? So there are many things that we can learn. I think the physical is one of those that we probably should learn less from, or at least understand in context, because there are many things that are unique to the military. But even in certain communities, they have similar challenges to helping their operators manage life off the field or out of combat as well. So we do share similarities, and we share similar challenges in taking care of the athlete first, taking care of the soldier first, the person first, and athlete or operator second.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely certainly some parallels there. Good stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about training. Coach Boyle always likes to say periodization is for guys in white lab coats who don't train anybody. You actually say periodization is dead in the book. Can you expand on your thoughts about periodization?
Yeah. I think, look, every time you say something like that, people get emotional about a term and whatever. So I want to say that at the outset. If somebody's jumped on the keyboard already, typing a response, just save your energy. The point is that traditional Olympic Soviet style, or whatever you want to call it, periodization, was and is incredibly effective for peaking for one game or another. But nowadays, in almost every sport, you're training all year round. There's no break. There is no off season, so to speak of. The difference between the preseason and mid season or playoffs is minimal. There's the actual competition schedule has changed completely. So for team sport athletes, if you're a basketball player, soccer player, baseball player, the season is year round. There's very little drop off. So it's easier to develop an athlete, and this is the same in special forces community. It's more important to develop an athlete that's closer to their peak but without excessive stress, develop a very good adaptable level of fitness, and to be able to help them reach mini peaks, if you want to call it, or mini periodizations, whatever you want to call it, whatever term you want to call it. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is simply to use a morphocycle or a weekly cycle, whereby you touch on each of the qualities throughout the week and you emphasize whichever one's needed, but you keep a weekly pattern. There are the other reasons that I believe very strongly in having a weekly pattern and you can change each week, but the pattern remains, is that every time you, as we know, introduce new exercises or change things too much, you cause soreness. There is not always the same level of adaptation. Mm-hmm. But the other key reasons for this is we live in the real world. We live in society. We all have partners, wives, family events. Having a weekly cycle and fitting your training program, a regular training program to a regular weekly cycle leaves things easier. So there's less stress. For example, if your wife always knows that, well, Wednesday he's home early and Sunday morning he doesn't start until a little bit later, or whatever it is, that helps us. That leaves life is easier. Life is so much easier. So now we can train harder and life is easier. We've got a weekly pattern. Secondly, we all have circadian rhythm, biological rhythms that we must respect. So again, by knowing that we will have a 12-hour rest period here, another one here, we now have a weekly pattern by which we can, once those are established, we can train very hard when we need to train very hard, and we can train whichever quality very hard. And every week we are getting consistently better. We're not just stepping out of something for 6 weeks and training hard and then 4 weeks off, or whatever your periodized model looks like. A solid weekly pattern, weekly morphocycle, is a far more sensible approach for the real world, and particularly for team sport athletes.
Interesting. Good stuff. I think this segues nice into some of your thoughts on right now, rest, recovery, sleep, huge topics. You said in the book there's no such thing as a full recovery after training. There's simply adaptation to stimuli. Trying to separate training and recovery into two distinct entities is pointless. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, so when we, people think that, well, okay, I lift for an hour and I'm going to be fatigued for X amount of time. It's not that simple. You've got multiple energy systems, you've got multiple biological systems that are stressed for a period of time, and you can train again within whatever short window you want to and train in a particular way. You don't simply have to stop training. There's always something you can do the next day. So it's a constant rate of adaptation. It's not just simply work and rest. Everything is a stimulus. So the body is being exposed to stimuli. For example, cold water. Is cold water a recovery method, or is it a training method? Cryotherapy or putting yourself in an ice bath. It all depends where you're coming from. If you're a Navy SEAL and you're being thrown into cold water, well, that's adaptation. That's a training method. But if you're doing it after a very, very hard weight session, it's a stimulus that will blunt adaptation or delay adaptation. So it's important to not just simply to view things in a very black and white way, but to understand, the only difference between, poison and medicine is the dosage and the timing. When do you use these things? And so, for example, in some instances, lightweight training is a recovery method. You can, after a heavy weight training session, you can come in the next day and do a very light, weight session to help stimulate recovery. So it's understanding that it's not just rest and recovery, black and white. There's a transient phase. You can delay recovery. You can delay recovery. You can't really speed it up. All you can do is facilitate the body to recover itself. So it's not that we can't force. People think, well, if I just jump into an ice bath straight after training, I'm speeding up recovery. Well, no, that's another stimulus that has a specific effect that can delay recovery, or delay a type of recovery, or can stimulate the body to spur it into recovery. So it's the idea that it's just this for or this is maybe just too simple a model for today's understanding in team sports.
Absolutely. And to even go into a little deeper, you had an interesting sidebar that you said that said there was a study, I guess, with NBA players maybe, players and teams who rested struggled to get back to previous performance levels. They failed to play at previous speeds. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, because there's a huge emphasis on resting players, and I go back to the weekly pattern, weekly cycle. The goal that we have every week is to deliver on a Sunday. So you can never rest too much, because the ability to get back into the speed of movement, I'm talking cognitively. Watch last weekend, watch Floyd Mayweather. One of the challenges that he'd been out for 2 years, and it took him a while, obviously, in the fight to get back up to the speed of the fight game, because if anyone who's trained boxers know, yes, you can talk about fitness and everything, but the speed at which they move is what makes them exceptional. And it's if you remove yourself too far from the game, rest too much, it takes you longer. It takes longer for the nervous system to get activated. It takes longer for the brain to understand and to process the visual stimuli that it's getting. So you again, as Coach Boyle would have said, you can still train a little bit and keep some small little bit of stimulus, but walking away from the game completely at times can be a very bad thing in terms of performance. And complete rest is not always the best thing. Doing a little bit, just keeping the engine ticking over a period of days is better than just walking away from it completely for a day. But there are instances, if a player is completely fatigued, where taking a break is a good thing. But for sensible planning, it's better to come in and do 30 minutes, for 3 or 4 days if you're feeling a little bit down, than just walking away completely from it.
Yeah, it's funny because although I was surprised by that, I was just thinking about watching the NHL playoffs and where a team would sweep and then the other team played 7 games. So the one team had, this big break, and you think, oh, cool, they're not going to get hurt. And then they come out, and the team that just played like 2 nights before, 7-game war, they go out 2 nights later and they win game 1. Because I felt like,
and that correct, and that is why, because it's very little of it's to do with physical. It's to do with the cognitive, emotional ability to work and to operate at that speed. But it's also because that group of individuals has played together for that period of time. They're in a battle rhythm. That's where this morphocycle is critical. And if you take those teams, they've got into that habit of, play the game, do their whatever rest, recovery, play the game again. They're in a battle rhythm. Their body becomes adjusted to executing on command, whereas the other team that's taken time off has just lost that synchronicity, particularly with teammates. That's when you see it most. When somebody, when maybe somebody or a team, but being in that battle rhythm. And this is why the best teams, in my experience, across all sports, by using a weekly model, the Sunday or the Saturday, whatever the game day is, even in the off season, the focus should be on delivering a challenge or a test or a game or a scrimmage, and delivering on Sunday, so that the body psychologically, the athlete psychologically is prepared to deliver on Sunday, whatever it is. Deliver on Sunday, and the weekly pattern goes back into whatever the pattern is. Deliver on Sunday, and that's the most important part of that, and that's what you see when you see the teams that those playoff teams.
Absolutely, great stuff. Well, this has been amazing, and this book, like I said, is a beast. It's called Game Changer, The Art of Sports Science. So many people are talking about it right now. This is really going to be the thing that a lot of people are talking about for a while, because there is so much going on in this book. And I will say I was a little intimidated when I first got it, I said, oh my God, especially because you made the interview yesterday for this morning. I almost had a heart attack when I saw that. But once I read the introduction, and I saw the way the book is structured, I felt so much better, and I really started to get into it. I'm really excited to get into this, go a little deeper, and maybe have you back on, because I know there's a million things in here that we can talk about. So, Coach, thanks for so much. I know you're super busy. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about Game Changer, the art of sports science. Great job with it.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 214 of the Strength Coach Podcast. A special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Don't forget, annual summer sale, crazy blowout prices. Sale prices are sizzling this summer. Things are heating up. Aaron McGurr wrote all this stuff. Biggest sale of the year, and will go on through September 30th. All the top sellers are on sale. Mini bands, super bands, cook bands, test kits, Dynamax balls, rollers, mats, kettlebells, ropes. You name it, prices have been slashed. Go to performbetter.com for that. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Dr. Fergus Connolly for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and game-changing. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Frank Dolan for Functional Movement Systems segment. Go to functionalmovement.com to check them out. And of course, remember, strengthcoach.com. You can try it out for 3 days, just $1. Access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your 3-day trial. My name's Anthony Renna. Don't forget, go to continuefit.com. Sign up for the Success Series, 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. That's continuefit.com. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.